Get over here. It's N64 Works Episode 4. To begin with, let me state for the record that I am terrible at Mortal Kombat, having only ever dabbled in the Street Fighter King of Fighters side of the fighting genre. And I'm no great shakes at hockey either, so please forgive the wretched quality of the footage I've captured. That said, our first proper third-party releases for Nintendo 64 come to us from Midway, perhaps the crowning jewel in the glittering diadem known as the N64 Dream Team. Ah yes, the Dream Team. Nintendo ruled the 8-bit era in North America and Japan, as well as some swaths of Europe. Their grip on the West slipped during the 16-bit era, at least until Sega decided to shoot its lead with Genesis cheerfully in the face, but Super Famicom nevertheless dominated Japan. Nintendo's decade-long lock on the Japanese market and its strong performance abroad came at a price. They alienated many third-party partners along the way. Just about all of what we know about Nintendo's relations in the 90s comes from secondhand sources rather than from what Nintendo's own staff has said, but there's a certain through line within those accounts that paints a pretty consistent picture. Nintendo built itself an efficient engine of profits with a licensing model that kept a steady stream of revenues flowing into the company while laying all the financial risk for publishing on a Nintendo platform at the feet of its licensees. In the days when Nintendo dominated the industry and publishing an NES game was basically a quick road to easy money for all involved, third parties were willing to accept these terms, despite some mild resentment. As Nintendo's market share waned in the 90s, even as the number of games reaching retail in a given month grew, consumers began to grow savvier and more selective. And that meant publishing on Super NES was no longer the blank check that the NES had been. And anyway, you could also work with Sega for their massively popular Genesis, under much fairer licensing terms. Suddenly, the Nintendo proposition was no longer a no-brainer. It certainly didn't help Nintendo's image that they pulled stunts like publicly ditching Sony on the eve of a huge partnership announcement.
You've got to be kidding.
And then there was the fact that the N64 would use expensive, low-capacity cartridges, making for a far costlier platform to publish on than Sony's PlayStation or Sega Saturn, both of which used the CD-ROM format. All of these choices by Nintendo stemmed from the same place: a sense of protectionism and a determination to mitigate risk by passing it along to others. The Nintendo licensing model meant publishers paid upfront to produce their cartridges, which Nintendo would create and ship back to them whenever the production lines freed up, with no guarantees of help or bailouts in the event that those cartridges didn't sell. As the Super NES market had collapsed in the mid-90s, plenty of third parties ended up getting burned on unsold cartridge stock. This didn't result in an industry collapse akin to that of the early 80s or anything, but it did leave some publishers wary of locking themselves into the same dangerous scenario on N64, especially when Sony was over there offering such great terms for PlayStation partnerships and on a media format that better fit the ambitions of many developers to boot. Nintendo hemorrhaged third parties as the N64 emerged. As we've seen, Squaresoft bailed. Atlus took its hottest properties, the Shin Megami Tensei series, to PlayStation and Saturn. Capcom was a late arrival, only showing up with a paltry handful of ports years after N64's debut. Loyal Enix published a pair of games in Japan, and then jumped ship to Sony too. In an attempt to brighten up the conversation around N64 licensees, Nintendo began a public relations campaign touting what it referred to as the Dream Team, a lucky 13 or so companies who would be key development partners for the platform.
You got it.
This did not include major powerhouse names like Konami, Capcom, Electronic Arts, or Activision. It did, however, include the likes of Ocean, Software Creations, GameTech, and Acclaim. Oh, it wasn't all bad. You had Rare in there, but that was to be expected. They were a loyal Nintendo second party, and surely they always would be. And you had DMA Designs, the madcap anarchists, who would eventually rebrand into Rockstar North and create the most financially successful video game of all time.
Yes! Woo!
On the whole, however, the buzz Nintendo attempted to build around these studios did not bode well for the system's fortunes. But with all of that said, they did at least have Midway. An arcade powerhouse, Midway could lay claim to some of the hottest coin-op hits of the mid-90s. Racers like CRUIS'N USA, wrestling titles emblazoned with the WWF license, Manic sports creations like NBA Jam, and of course, Mortal Kombat. And that's where we come in. The third-party legacy of N64 finally kicks off in the US 2 months after the system's launch, with the November 11th release of Mortal Kombat Trilogy and Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey, both courtesy of Midway. It's an ugly delay, but even uglier is the fact that this is the first third-party N64 release to ship in any region since the arrival of Saikyo Habushogi back at the Japanese launch in June. Despite suffering a year's worth of delays, the N64 still appears to have hit stores before most people working on the system were quite ready. And I don't really know that Mortal Kombat Trilogy was really the most auspicious opening salvo for the system. Mortal Kombat as a brand still had a glimmer of the street cred in 1996 that the first two games granted it, but on the whole the series' popularity, and its cachet, had begun to wane with the release of Mortal Kombat 3, the base game around which Trilogy was designed. Mortal Kombat 3 felt to many players like a case of Midway losing its sense of direction for the series. The first two games had thrived on their shock value, which let kids see imagery of graphic violence and mutilation in public spaces. But by 1996, a legion of copycats had numbed gamers to severed limbs and geysers of blood. Mortal Kombat 3 had attempted to balance this out with more elaborate secrets and finishing moves, but the ability to turn into an animal kind of missed the point. Fatalities were about hilariously humiliating a rival, not subjecting them to a goofy novelty. Additions like the run button proved controversial, and while the game sold pretty well, many reviewers and players alike could sense the franchise, as it existed to this point, had more or less reached its expiration date. Mortal Kombat Trilogy was the third iteration of Mortal Kombat 3 produced exclusively for consoles and following on from Ultimate Mortal Kombat. In no sense was it unique to N64. The PlayStation version of Trilogy had shipped a month earlier. And somewhat damningly, the PlayStation version included content that ended up being cut from the N64 release, including 7 characters and a few backgrounds. Which isn't to say the N64 was necessarily the lesser game, it added some unique features, such as a 3 versus 3 simultaneous battle mode. In other words, Mortal Kombat Trilogy ends up being less a definitive statement to drive home the technical superiority of N64 over the competition than it is a showcase of the respective strengths and weaknesses of what would become the generation's leading platform. The N64's cartridge format lacked the storage capacity of PlayStation's CD-ROMs, so characters and stages were left on the cutting room floor. Characters lost multiple frames of animation, and the audio quality suffered significantly. On the other hand, carts don't suffer from the severe load times of CD-ROMs, so the matches move along at a zippier pace with no downtime between matches. Smaller features like Shang Tsung's mid-battle character transformations are retained from the arcade games, power also possessed by this version's exclusive character, Chameleon, and bonus animations and secrets show up here that are absent in other home ports. In fact, the N64 version plays up its arcade roots more than any other version of Mortal Kombat Trilogy. This version restricts players to a limited number of credits for each playthrough, requiring additional credits and free play to be unlocked via multiplayer, which nudges players to explore the competitive aspect of the game. All of these things amount to pretty minor considerations in what is fundamentally another version of Mortal Kombat 3. Which is to say, it's pretty much still Mortal Kombat but with a lot of extra stuff. Dozens of characters face off against one another here, each one depicted through digitized imagery of real actors performing in front of a blue screen. It looks stilted and choppy compared to the best hand-animated Japanese fighters like King of Fighters and Street Fighter Alpha, especially when you consider the dropped animation frames the N64 version suffers from. Still, many of the characters had become iconic by this point, and the fundamentally naughty thrill of straight up murdering another combatant by reducing them to bloody chunks remains intact. Despite its title, Mortal Kombat Trilogy does not include all 3 MK games to this point. Rather, it's Mortal Kombat 3 with the addition of many characters and stages from previous titles. Besides the much-lamented run feature and animalities from Mortal Kombat 3, Mortal Kombat Trilogy further introduces brutality finishers and a feature called the Aggressor Meter. The former is a complex dial-a-combo system that feels like an attempt to play catch-up with Rare's Killer Instinct, while the Aggressor Meter works a lot like the Super Combo Gauge in Super Street Fighter II Turbo and the Alpha series. Mortal Kombat 1 and 2 characters returning from Limbo for the first time here are all upgraded with additional commands and skills to bring them in line with Mortal Kombat 3 standards, along with the animations to depict those abilities. That means all 30 characters can execute fatalities, animalities, babalities, friendships, and brutalities. In short, this is the final statement of the original trilogy of Mortal Kombat games, and the series as a whole before making the leap to 3D graphics the following year with Mortal Kombat 4. As with the incremental revisions Capcom made to Street Fighter II and Street Fighter Alpha in the 90s, Mortal Kombat Trilogy probably hit harder for people who had skipped a few versions than for those who clamored to buy each and every Mortal Kombat release at launch. But if you wanted a comprehensive referendum on 4 years of Mortal Kombat, Trilogy was the way to go. There is no definitive version of this game, although the N64 version might be seen as the closest thing to it, if only because it was the only version developed internally at Midway rather than being farmed out to a contractor. That is Dream Team magic in action, baby. That said, it does seem a little strange to have a Mortal Kombat as a lead title for N64. The original Mortal Kombat had been a massive black eye for Nintendo and the Super NES thanks to the company's mandate for censorship. Even though they lightened up by the time Mortal Kombat 2 rolled around, the damage had been done, and not a lot of people associated Nintendo with being the go-to for faithful renditions of Mortal Kombat. I suppose you could see this game as a statement of intent for the next generation. No bowdlerization here, thank you very much, because the N64 is a console for grown-ups. Never mind that it would take until CONKER'S Bad Fur Day in 2000 to really see anyone pushing the boundaries. But whatever. Thanks to its features, and no doubt being one of the few N64 games available during the 1996 holiday drought, Mortal Kombat Trilogy sold quite well. So it seems Nintendo's licensing model could still pay dividends after all.
The NHL and the NHLPA present Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey.
Midway's other debut title for N64, Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey, also plays up the company's strengths as an arcade manufacturer. Gretzky also hits a critical milestone for the platform in that it's the first release to take advantage of one of N64's greatest strengths, its built-in support for 4 players. Unfortunately, in this age of social distancing, I can't actually rally together enough people to show off the 4-person action, but trust me, it's there. 4-player gaming would become a huge selling point for N64. Just think about how deeply GoldenEye 007, Super Smash Bros., and even Mario Kart 64 are ingrained into the collective conscious of a certain age group. The N64 excelled as a party machine, thanks to its 4 integrated controller ports, and, to be fair, thanks to running on a rugged media format whose lack of load times facilitated instant pick-up-and-play experiences. Gretzky may not be the best known of the N64's 4-person classics, but it paved the way. It's also the first of many games to bear some sort of popular license likeness, at least in the US. For some weird reason, America didn't get Saikyo Habu Shogi. In this case, that likeness belongs to Ice Hockey All-Star Wayne Gretzky. But not just Gretzky. As the title screen proudly proclaims, Midway locked down the rights to both the NHL's team and player likenesses through the Players Association. The game is about what you'd expect from Midway, a loose, arcade-style take on hockey. The company had plenty of experience in this area thanks to NBA Jam and NFL Blitz, and their take on hockey is similar, albeit less loved. I'm not going to pretend to be a hockey expert here, and my familiarity with the genre begins with Nintendo's ice hockey and ends with Blades of Steel. All I know is that this game takes liberties with the rules of the sport, including some bizarre skills that range from comically hospitalizing an opponent to your goalie metamorphosing into a wall to block a shot. Midway 1, Realism 0. Wayne Gretzky's 3D Hockey seems to have reviewed on the positive side of middling back in the day, and user reviews on sites like Moby Games and GameFAQs bear this out. By all accounts, from people who know the sport better than I do, it's good, dumb fun with a tedious single-player mode balanced by extremely fun multiplayer. And though it would be eclipsed by superior hockey games later in the N64's life, in the console's early days, it filled that Gretzky-shaped hole in sports fans' hearts.
Bombs away! That goalie's a wall!
Next time on N64 Works, we turn our eyes to Japan for basically the exact opposite of these games.